Good morning. It's still the morning. Yes, I will be introducing our panel. My name is Tracy Whelpley. I'm with our local regional economic development group here on the business attraction team, trying to attract more businesses to St. Louis. And amongst the industries that we are focused on, of course, is geospatial. And I have also worked for the past 3 or 4 years on the initiative we call GeoFutures, which is to promote and grow our geospatial community here in St. Louis. And in that process, I have discovered I am a frustrated geographer. So this couldn't be more fun for me to live virtually through all the amazing people I've come to know and work with and all the careers that intersect with geospatial. And our panel today really reflects some of that diversity of career and study and education that goes into some of these exciting fields. So the first person I'll introduce is Emily Blackburn, who is a senior geospatial analyst at UMSL, and speak of amazing careers. She also worked for 15 years as a crime analyst at the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department. So, but now is at UMSL and helping to educate and recruit new people into this great field. And next is Dr. Dee Jordan, who's an instructor of global health and social medicine at Harvard Medical School, has a dual doctorate in geography and environmental science, and her research focuses on ecological and environmental determinants of disease risk. And Dr. Jordan has also been a leader and a consultant in increasing diversity of African American, Latinx American, and Native American students in the discipline of geography. Thank you. And finally, we have Jessie Bleile. And Jessie is with the NGA as a geodetic orbit analyst. And that involves monitoring satellite. Is that how would
GPS.
you? Okay, yeah. GPS and satellite.
Mostly GPS.
But in terms of education, is a professor of practice here at UMSL and is also involved in facilitating the NGA's educational partnership agreement. So that is the panel, and we will get started with some questions. And if you'll advance to our slide, we'll keep that up there for people can start reading while we ask our first question. But I would love to hear each of your personal stories, and I'm sure our audience would too. How did you come to choose a career that had such a strong geospatial intersection in geography, geospatial tech? Like, what sparked your interest and got you going?
I fell into it. I graduated in the mid-90s and kind of fell into it. Like Tracy said, I'm a criminologist by trade. I got my master's degree here from UMSL in the early 2000s, and I was just kind of an investigator and have investigated things from as abreast as mortgage fraud and Medicare fraud in South Florida. But while I was in South Florida, my spouse worked for the Latino Drug Abuse and Research Center out of FIU, and they had a lot of trouble geocoding. Like, they couldn't get it, and they set up their geocoders wrong, and they didn't realize that multiple cities had the same streets. Yeah, so they didn't put zip code and city in, so it was a mess. And I had a lot of fun kind of teasing that out and helping them advance that. And things have come a long way, as we've discussed. And so when we moved back to the Midwest, the city of St. Louis was doing their pilot program for crime analysis, and they're like, well, we need somebody who knows something about mapping. And I could talk barely legitimately about geocoding, and they're like, good enough, right? Because it was more than anybody else had. So it was a transferable skill set. We just talked about that in the last presentation, a transferable skill set, and fell into that and kind of moved the city of St. Louis from these paper maps that we would print out to a full suite of dashboards, very Johns Hopkins COVID-like dashboards and applications where we can get the data immediately. And so really ran from that. So that's kind of how I did it. Just kind of fell into it, but had a knack for it.
Interesting. And what about you, Dee?
Yeah, so my story is not dissimilar. I was in undergrad, biology, environmental health, and marine science. I'm a Libra. I like to do things in dual, so it keeps the balance. And so when I transferred from my institution, which I absolutely loved what I was doing, but I transferred to an institution that did not have biology, environmental health, and marine science. They didn't have marine science. It was in Atlanta, so we're landlocked. So the guidance counselor suggested geography, and I was like, say what now? What? Because my folks sent me to school to become a doctor, so what are you talking about? And she's like, well, you know, geography crosses all these different spaces and all this stuff. And I'm like, girl, I have to tell my family what I'm doing, and I will not have my grandmother go to the church and say, please pray for my granddaughter because she has just lost her mind. But, you know, I went over to the department and I met one of the lecturers there, and he had this storied career in the Peace Corps and went to all these places, and he was this geographer who had graduated from Kent State. And I said, well, I'll give you guys one semester to prove to me that you deserve me. So he was like, we'll keep you. And I was like, okay. So I got in the course that he taught, and of course a couple of others. And they invited a speaker. Her name was Dr. Kim Elmer. She was at the CDC. She worked in the division of HIV and AIDS prevention as the sole geographer in that division. And wow, wow, wow. Everything that came out of her mouth was like this rhythmic symphony of all the reasons why I needed to do this. And I said, I want to be her. And, and that's what I've become, her sister. And I remember her talking about medical geography, and I was like, wait, there is a medical arm to this thing? No one told me it had tentacles. And so listening to her lecture and her working at the CDC, a place that I wanted to work at, it kind of was like, I've got to figure this out, but I don't want to commit too soon. I need to slow roll this. So I decided to become her intern and work at DHAP, learn what she did, try on this career before committing to it, because maybe I have some commitment issues. But then she said, this is the place for you, Dee. And place is intended. She said, this is the place for you. I think this is what you should do. And honestly, from there, it's been the best decision I could have made.
What a great story, that one person can make such a difference.
She's amazing.
That's great. And Jessie, how about you? How did you find your way?
Yeah, sure. So I was studying biology here at UMSL. I'm from the St. Louis area. I thought I wanted to be a veterinarian. That's what I wanted to be my whole life. And so I didn't really go through any other doors. Like in high school, I just thought that's my path. And then I found myself like missing mathematics. I had been really good at math, but no one really showed me that there was a career in math. So I switched my major to math, and then had no idea what I was going to do, because that was not the path to veterinary school. And so that's when I finally started looking like for open doors. Like, what opportunities could I sign up for just to learn more about a career in math? Do I want to get my PhD? What do I want to do? So I signed up for this fellowship program that was through the United Way, but it was for like, rising juniors at St. Louis area universities. So I was the representative from UMSL that year, and they take all the students and they put them in a nonprofit. But then they got to me and they saw math, and they're like, I don't know, what nonprofit should you work at? So I ended up at the St. Louis Police Department working for Emily, actually.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and so I knew nothing about mapping or crime. I knew how to do statistics really well. So I actually got the opportunity, Emily enabled me to really sit down and learn GIS that summer. So I was making some of the crime maps, and I would go to like the presentations, and I was like, I made that map. I was so proud, and so I had this like tool in my hand finally. So I went back to school in the fall. I was looking for any GIS or geospatial related courses. And long story short, that really ultimately led me to my position at NGA, because I was able to put on my application that I had done geospatial analysis that had been presented to decision makers, and policy had been changed because of that. And that was exactly what the NGA was looking for. But I didn't go in NGA and start making maps. I started as a geodetic orbit scientist, And actually before that, an earth scientist working for Dr. Nikki Markeel, it's like a name many people here know, doing actually math. And so there was an interesting turn where I really got into NGA because of the GIS, but was still very much in that pure mathematics side. So it was a nice fusion of those two passions.
So in geodesy, then, you represent one of these few that we need to make many more of.
Yes,
in order to
absolutely.
keep up with the rest of the world in terms of geospatial science. So, well, thank you. Those are amazing stories, and I did not realize that you had worked together at the police department. Okay. So we have this slide that the panel here put together, just, back, that has all the list of careers that intersect and with geospatial science and have a geospatial component. And I am just amazed when I look through this list. And the question I had was, has it always been this way? Or is geographical thinking, which I know Jack Dangermond with Esri uses that term, or geospatial science, more relevant today than it has been in the past? Is it just because we're here in St. Louis and it's such a strong center for geospatial, or is there just a lot more awareness of it today than there was in the past?
I think I don't know that it's more relevant. I think it's more accessible. So, I was joking earlier, like a lot of my jokes have been stolen today, or things I wanted to say. So Bob had challenged people early on to find an industry where it doesn't. And I'm like, I have this slide, careers A to Z, but I always challenge people. This is a slide I use when I talk to high school seniors a lot, just to get their mind thinking of the different ways, and we can look at it. But we talked about, maps have been around from 25,000 to 14,000 BC. So it's not new, right? Esri was founded in 69, MapQuest 67. So we've moved on, right? There's these thousands and thousands of years where you had to have survey tools, mathematic knowledge, knowledge of astronomy to make these maps. They couldn't be printed or replicated. So it was a big deal to have a map, like a really big deal. And now it's not a big deal. We've got it is a big deal, but it's not hard to access, right? It's still a big deal. So I think it's much more accessible. And then when I talk to people, so my role here at UMSL, and the reason I pivoted from policing to UMSL, a friend of mine came over here and said, we really need you to help us like build out curriculum and do all these things because you have such a wide range of knowledge. Because even when I started in the early 2000s in law enforcement, like I had to reach into biology and zoology and all these other industries to apply that knowledge to my industry, so crime analysis. And just when I talk to people from fields as diverse as health, to spatial science, to local governments, they always think they need a map. And I'm like, well, actually you need this and that and the other, and here's how it can help, and tying all these things together. So I think it's just more accessible. And here in St. Louis, we get it a little more because we are concentrating so much in it, but there's still this room to really bring together teachers from K all the way through higher education across all these industries. So I think it's just more relevant and not more relevant, but more accessible. And we are really starting to move the science forward because of that understanding. And to Retta's map about the 3,000 lines, it's exactly what I tell people. It helps you communicate all of that information so much more quickly. And people are really starting to see that. So it helps drive the science forward, but all science forward in every industry, which I think is so exciting.
And Dee, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so my position is a little different. I actually think it is more of an awareness, for geography, specifically in the health spaces. So as a person who is a biomedical research scientist who happens to be a health and medical geographer, I can assure you that when I applied for fellowships at MD Anderson, the NIH, and the NCI back in the day, say 2010, people would look at their fellows and my application and they would tilt their head because I was a geographer applying into these public health spaces. In fact, when I was mentored by U.S. Surgeon General Dr. Regina Benjamin, Vice Admiral Dr. Regina Benjamin, I went to her office, the Office of the Surgeon General, and I told her, I was a little disturbed by the U.S. Public Health Commission Corps, the 6th branch of the U.S. military, because they did not have a space, this was in 2010, for geographers or anything other than people in public health, and it was very, very narrow. And I told her I felt constrained as a geographer because I understood that geographic thought, spatial awareness is super important to health, public health, and global health in general. And she said, well, that's something that we should change. Some 15 years later, sure, I can now apply, but I'm now aged out of the system, but that's neither here nor there. Back to the question, specifically, when you have industries where the exclusion effect occurs because they don't understand the necessity, for whatever it is, COVID-19 bridged that awareness. More than anything, people started to understand the necessity of a geographic person or a person who thinks spatially in their spaces and on their teams. There was a run on including geographers on many teams. I had so many opportunities to be on grants that had nothing to do with what I actually did because I'm a geographer, because they felt that thought process would elevate and enhance the work that they were doing. In fact, PBS Kids Curious About Careers had been around since 2014, and they had surveyed and interviewed people all over with different careers. In 2020, Dee Jordan became the first geographer on PBS Kids Curious About Careers because it was at the height of the pandemic. My background was in biomedical research sciences. I was looking at infectious diseases, specifically COVID-19. They wanted to talk to a geographer. So to me, it is exactly that. Geography has become, in recent times, more relevant, not more accessible, because it's always been marginally accessible. If you went to a college, in recent years, it's become open. You can do Esri open services. It has become more accessible. 2010, I wrote my master's thesis on how GIS could be used as a community advocacy tool for community-based organizations. So I don't think it's necessarily accessibility. I think it's the awareness of how important geographic education is and how much better off the world will be if they include people with a geographic background on their teams.
That's a mic drop. I think we're done. No.
Yeah, I don't think I can follow that one. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we will move on to the next question then. And I want to talk for a minute about employers in these industries. And my understanding, and I have kids that are in their 20s, is that kids have become much more attuned to what job is this going to get me? What are employers looking for? I want to go to an in-demand field. So if we look at these industries, are the employers focused on recruiting people that are mappers and analysts, or are there other skill sets that they are looking for that kind of contribute to this to help us understand where those fields of study kind of converge? And let me see. I'll let whoever wants to go first.
On this one. I do work at NGA, and I think that for a long time, maybe people didn't know a lot of what NGA did as an intelligence agency here in St. Louis. But like any other big company, we hire everyone. We need all the skills, right? We do have an HR department. We have a lot of business that has to get done with contracts, financial management. And then, of course, we do have the mapping and the geospatial analysis portion. So we do want those, technical skills. I have to always mention the hard sciences, the geophysics and the mathematics side, because that's also of vital importance and is, we're lacking in that skill set. So I think in terms of like academic tracks that you could go into, they're abundant, right? We're always hiring interns in all of those different fields at the collegiate and now even at the high school level. But I would say underlying all of those, what we need in the government, in this intelligence industry, is critical thinking. So we don't need a student who just knows how to look up an address on Google Maps and then follow the instructions. We need someone to ask, why is that building there? Why is this clump of restaurants here? why do I use dark colors versus light colors in this map? I think our teacher before mentioned that. That is a skill that we need, at NGA, and I would argue with a number of these other geospatial companies as well, because the technology is becoming more prolific in all these different, companies and within academia and all the different fields. But we have to still know how to ask why, really to advance, continue advancing that science.
And before we go then to one of the other panelists to discuss this, can you advance to the next slide? Because I think this really kind of showed the focus areas in geospatial sciences and be helpful for you to see that as we're discussing that. So Emily, I'll let you go next then.
I agree with Jesse and what Dee said in the last one too. It's like, it's so relevant because, my position, to backtrack just a little at the university, like I'm on all kinds of grants, right? And I do things on urban planning grants all the time, and I talk to I'm on biology grants, and I'm on with the School of Nursing on a couple, and on the Department of Psychology, and do some opioid overdosing stuff. So I'm like 5% here and 10% there, but all across campus, right? And which is what makes the job so fun. Like I have real depth in one area, but I'm getting the range and everything else, but it's so important. But to this specific question, Tracy, I think sort of yes and no. I think it's a transferable skill, and that's what they talked about in the last session. It's such a transferable skill, much like knowing some light Python or some SQL or knowing how to use Excel and a pivot table, right? I think it's a more interesting skill. It's a skill that's transferable across industries. So they talked about, being 14 and having to decide, which I've always thought is completely unfair. I'm 45, and yesterday I was going to go into agronomy, right? Like they had me sold, and then today I'm like, well, what about education, right? I'm very apparently influenceable. I'm very influenceable. Yeah, absolutely. Every time I talk to somebody, I'm going to trade careers and upskill in something. But I think it's a skill that is not lost on your students. So, thinking of my audience today, I think that when you look at all those industries and you look at this diagram, and this is just my thinking out loud and putting things down on paper because I am a visual learner, it's not a skill that's going to be lost. It's not a throwaway skill. It's something that these students are going to use across everything. Even if they don't go into the career, it's like data fluency. We have to be able to interpret these graphs and not misinterpret them. So I think it's a life skill. So no matter what industry they go into, it's super useful. But that was just a slide that that was as many industries as I could fit on one piece of paper, right? And I think anybody in here could add to and critique my slide and add 10 more. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think the list is great, but I think for me, so for those of you who don't know, I have this little program. It's called the Advancing Geography Through Diversity Program, which is an intentional recruitment, retention, and matriculation program that I started at Michigan State as a graduate student. And by intentional, it's that I intentionally don't seek out geographers to recruit for the program. Why is that? Because I think geography would be more robust if we had a diverse, not just in skin and complexion and age, but also in thought. I think people from other backgrounds can serve the discipline of geography. But I also don't think that this starts at the graduate level in which my recruitment initiative begins. The reason why I did PBS Curious About Careers is because that's targeted to middle schoolers and high schools. I think it starts in the K-12 system. I'm an advocate for increasing geography's footprint in the K-12 system because I think that that's where the first awareness, it can't happen in undergrad, and you can't keep tripping into geography. It's fine if it happens, but you need to have an intentional, awareness, people who are letting you know that this opportunity is there, that it's not just doctors, lawyers, engineers, and the traditional stuffs that people are pushing on the kids, but that you should encourage kids to be curious. Intellectual curiosity is what I think is killing disciplines like geography. People aren't being curious about what it can be. I was a person who was quite curious about spaces, places, the oceans, the skies, and I felt like I could go and do whatever I wanted into all these places. I wasn't thinking about the revenue. I wasn't thinking about, well, how do I get there? I didn't think about a passport. My mind just leapt out of me, and I just thought the world is an opportunity. I should be a part and a big contributor to it, right? So what was missing, I think, from the list, in my opinion, are these entrepreneurs, people like my friend Clinton Johnson, who has the North Star GIS, who is a change agent to change the dynamics of who and what can actually be a geographer. Myself, Dee Jordan, and the AGTDP, and the Celebrating Black Geographers Anthology, which is hosted online by the gracious support of the AGS, which is telling people of all the places and all the industries and all the people who look like people like me, who aren't the traditional geographers, but who can in fact be geographers and have profound impacts. We can't limit it to just the things with ology or ist in the name. There has to be so many other places where a geographer, the full body of a geographer, can be situated in a place, transform that environment, and push the tide so that geographer isn't the place or the discipline that gets the, well, what do we do with her? Mm-hmm. Instead, geography is the place like, yes, we want you, come. You know, as a social medicine instructor, social scientists are key to so many of these dynamics. It's not just hard science. And I hate that they call it hard science, because that creates a binary that means the other science is soft, and the science I do is not soft by any means necessary at all. So I don't think that it's a hard and soft. I think it's just science, right? We have to change the words, our vocabulary, increase the awareness so that these kids understand the opportunities they have to do good science, regardless to what industry it's in, hoping that it'll be geography.
Fantastic. So probably the most talked about subject in any industry right now is AI. And I would love to hear from you. How is AI changing geospatial analysis, geospatial careers? Is it something to be embraced, or is it something to be feared, as you know, we are hearing a lot in the media? And I'll let you, I think we're going to start with Emily on that one.
Yeah, that's fine. I think embraced. I really do. You know, in my last job, every time something new or shiny came up, folks would always be like, oh, watch out for your job. You know, oh my God, they're going to get your job. That's automated now. And there's plenty to do. I've never found myself sitting around not having a lot of work to do in any job. But I also think there's a human element. So, you know, in the presentation by OpenStreetMaps today, they talked about wheelchair ramps not always being mapped, right? I think that could be an AI job. That's some drones, some aerial imagery, writing the code for machine learning to identify those things and get them on a map. Like, that's one but many opportunities there. We've had a lot of advancement in tree canopy coverage and talking about that, and that's a machine learning AI sort of situation where we know more about the tree canopy than we did before. We just know it quickly. I think yesterday someone talked about different algorithms and machine learning, and something that took him 3 days, and it was with managing disease in crops, because we need to increase our food yield. That took 3 days, now takes 30 seconds. So, you know, we can advance that, but there's so much work to be done. And when I talk about, and talked earlier about how this is advancing all science, that's what I mean. Like, that doesn't take away our jobs. That frees us up to do the next step so that we can really advance things, because things are so difficult. And there's so many things we have to learn. Like, when I think about my kid coming to me yesterday and being like, I coded my name onto blah, blah, blah. And like, I didn't think about coding when I was 10. So he's ahead of me, but that just opens up the avenue. So I think we have to embrace that, because it takes some of that 3-day slog of work that we have to do away from us, and then opens our mind and our bandwidth to do the next step. Not to mention the fact that somebody has to think of that. I think geography is very creative. I've only been successful in what I've done because I've been able to think creatively on how to express these things. And that's really where I'm the value add. And exactly what you said, the value add to any project is I can think about how to show this, how to visualize it, how to get people enthused about it behind the scenes using maps and data visualizations and geography. I think machine learning just adds to that.
Fantastic. Jesse, I know this is a big topic at GA, so I know you have a lot to say.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the era of like AI, machine learning, we have to be better scientists. It can't let us like slack off. We have to be even better at what we do. It reminds me of when I was like learning mathematics and learning like the definition of continuity, so for those math teachers out there, and the old definition, right, when math was like, you know, the advent of mathematics and formalizing everything, the definition was just like being able to draw a line without lifting your pencil, right? And now I was like, you know, 18 learning that, and that was like profound science at one point, right? And I see that like with AI and ML, in some ways it's really pushed everything so forward that now we have to even go beyond, right, that. And I think that it can free up that time to allow us to think creatively, but we can't slack off in like that foundational understanding of science and going back to the critical thinking, because otherwise we will forget what these algorithms are meant to do. So in my role now with NGA, I'm supporting the educational partnerships with UMSL and Harris-Stowe State University here in St. Louis. And there was one student working on a project with an NGA team. That was something that this partnership enabled us to do. And this team at NGA, they're all, you know, been at NGA for a number of years, and so their project was to try to build a machine learning model that can identify certain features at ports, right? So really important for the customer in the military. So the student was sort of tasked with identifying different port features, you know, identifying them on imagery, tagging them and labeling them, and having to understand why he has to look at the same picture so many times. And it was really difficult for him to wrap his mind around. He's like, understanding that I'm just collecting this data. But he was having trouble understanding like the fact that the shadows are moving because of the way the Earth's moving. So he was getting the tech, but the underlying like understanding of the physical Earth was lacking. And it just made me realize how important it was to, all right, stop then this AI project. We got to go back to the basics, build that foundation, then the project is so much more enhanced. And in the end, he didn't have as much time to, you know, tag as many images as we wanted, right? But we did the right thing by making sure he got the foundation. And so I would say that, like, yes, we want students that code, we want that to be part of the classroom, but that foundation has to be there first so you understand why that technology enhances it in the first place.
Well, we just have one more question because we did want to leave plenty of time for Q&A. And I think this gets back to some of the things Dee was saying, that we want this diverse range of students coming into these fields. There is no one type of student that can excel or contribute greatly to these careers. So with the audience of educators, what advice would you give to them to help them get students interested and excited about geography? Go ahead, Emily.
I think it's so much more than states and capitals, right? Like I hated my states and capitals in high school. Like I don't know that I made a good grade on it. Like I couldn't get into it, right? So it's bringing that relevance. So, you know, to Jesse's last point about going back and the shading and all that stuff, like I think knowing that and hopefully as educators knowing like the relevance to the NGA now, right? Like everybody in this room sees a little more relevance on why we need to know that. And I think bringing the relevance to students is always so important. But when I think about geography and talking to students, and when I talk to high school students and even like younger students at my son's middle school, like I talked to him like I had to talk to like a younger students, and I'm like, how many of you like know geointelligence? They're like, oh, we don't know that. I'm like, how many of you play Fortnite? And I'm like, everybody. And I'm like, do you land at a different spot if you're in a duo than in a solo match, or do you land somewhere different if you're in a squad? And they're like, yeah, because there's good loot here, but if I land by myself, I'm like, that's geointelligence. Like that's how we use it, right? You're already doing it. You just don't know that you're doing it. So like if you're a gamer, you're thinking about it, or we were talking about story maps earlier, and somebody's like, there's got to be a story map on this. So there's a story map on everything. But I was teaching, Jesse and I teach a lecture series to faculty here, and I was doing one on, I think on story, like different tools we could use, and like there's this beautiful story map on Dungeons and Dragons, and I lost like half my audience, like we're not paying attention to me because they were like lost in this Dungeons and Dragons map that the student made, and you could not get more nerdier than a Dungeons and Dragons story map. Like I don't, like if you tried, you could. But it's like, so I think just talking to students and we hear this phrase, meet them where they're at, but I think it's so easy to do here. And, you know, at UMSL, we work with different programs and we want to increase diversity, but diversity of thought, diversity of race, diversity of everything, age, and where you're getting into it. And I think that so many students get into this. If you're into art, maybe you're a cartographer, right? And you're making those really beautiful maps. But if you're into gaming, maybe geointelligence is more for you. If you're into storytelling, story maps are good. But there's so much out there within this broad field. If you're really into space, obviously there's so much, right? But I never really realized what I could do with all these things. So I think any student we can talk about this, and you saw from the diversity of the fields and the diversity of things that we're trying to do. And this particular slide that we have up, when I started here and started talking to faculty and how we're going to build out what we do at UMSL, we were really thoughtful about, let's not put all of our classes in this one bucket. Let's make sure that we have this computing spot, this spatial, science is spelled wrong, spatial science on the slide, space and place, spatial thing. Like, let's make sure we're hitting across all this. Let's get as many students introduced to this as we can, because we don't know where they're gonna go or what they're gonna do, but how can we keep going?
So I'll make mine really quick in the interest of time. So I think you start very early. I think early and often, right? I was in Chile for a month studying health reform. And while I was there, I told James Mallison, one of our employees, our staff members at AGS, his son and I share a love for Easter Island and the Moai. And I said, well, James, I'm so close. I'm just gonna pop over. And when I go over, I'm going to do something special for your son. And in this tradition, I usually record the places I go for the people who can't go to those places, so they can have this experience of being there. So with James's son, Theodore, I made a series of videos with his name to him so that he can show to his class. He has a friend that's on Easter Island. I'm talking to him about the history of the Moai and how they got to the places they were, and showing him the lovely landscapes. But in that, he's in kindergarten. In that, showing him that part of the world, something he's loved but has only seen on TV, and now he has a friend who's using his name in the very space, in the places where something he loves is located. That connects, there's a through line. There was a spatial thought in every aspect of everything I did for a kindergartner and for a kindergarten class. What does that do? Inspire curiosity, right? This aspiration, like, wow, I can be there. Wow, I can go. That place exists, not just on Nat Geo, Discovery Channel, but it exists. And this girl, she was actually there, right? So things like everywhere she maps, and youth mappers become super important because they're out in the world, tapping into those networks, tapping into that information, sharing it with your students. It's a way to inspire. Also, bringing people in to talk, encouraging your students to do informational interviews. Informational interviews are not just for people who are in college. In fact, I have suggested my son do informational interviews starting at the age of 15. Why is it? Because I needed him to start engaging in these fields and with people who are in these fields that he thought he wanted to go into, so he can learn very early whether or not it sparks something in him or whether it's a miss. It's important to know these things, and it's important to get out there and network with people and invite people to your classes. Connect with them, let people come and razzle dazzle your students in ways in which they may have heard these things from you, but oftentimes with my kid, having someone else say the exact same thing I said made a whole world of difference. So I encourage you to reach out to your networks. The AGS has a ton of scholars and professionals in all the industries you can imagine that would be willing and would love to come out, especially those on the council and our fellows. Come out and talk to your students and encourage them to consider these, geographic and geospatial opportunities.
So I think to stay on time, we'll go ahead and open up for questions for any of the panelists. Anybody? Yes?
Can we get the link to that D&D smart map?
I don't know. I'll have to talk to the student and see, but I'm happy to ask.
If you Google, you'll find it.
Anyone else? Okay. Well, thank you so much. You guys have been great.
To make some concluding comments, it's my pleasure to welcome back Chancellor Soblik and Dr. Ann Taylor, the Dean of the College of Education at UMSL. Immediately after their remarks, we hope you will join us for lunch. We'll be served in the rear of the room. Chancellor Soblik and Dean Taylor.
All right, well, thank you, everybody. We so appreciate you taking time out of your relaxation schedule to come here and really engage in something that's absolutely crucial for our region and for our future as a nation. You are on the front lines. It's all about how to engage our students, our future, for our collective success. So kudos to you. We're so pleased to have you at the University of Missouri St. Louis engaging in this important topic. And at that point, I want to introduce you to Dean Ann Taylor. She's Dean of our College of Education here at the University of Missouri St. Louis, and she is leading fantastic teams that are out and about in our community in all ways. So I'm going to let Dean Taylor close us out today.
Thank you, Chancellor Soblik. I think the last panel pretty much summed it up, and I'm going to quote my new hero, Dee there, who said, wow. You know, so much of geography can be summed up in the two questions I learned in my undergraduate degree in geography from Nottingham University in the north of England. What is where and why is it there? Because it's the maps that help us answer that question. And it's our critical thinking, it's our curiosity that helps us reveal the inequities that hide in plain sight without those maps. We've heard about that today. It's the future of how we learn to think about humanity and our environment. It's the relationships between those things that are only revealed in the maps and our ability to know who made the map and whether or not we're looking at a good one. So I want to say thank you. Maps have been around for hundreds of years. But of course, what we're hearing about now is how the world is transformed by the accessibility and the speed and the power with which we can now produce maps if we have access to the data, and above all, if the teachers, the educators, are given the time and the ability to create the pathways for our next generation. So if there's an ask as you're heading out, it's anybody who isn't a K-12 teacher or if you are as well, let's talk up the enormous critical value of teachers and educators. And let's understand the complex work that they need to do in order to shift what they're currently doing, learn about the tools, and really ensure that the next generation, certainly in this part of our region, but across the country and the globe, that they have access to the knowledge and the tools to make this a better world. So I will say thank you to everybody. Thank you for the AGS for being here, for all our friends at Esri and the NGA, above all, the teachers who've made this possible. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy lunch.